Welcome to Finlos Loves. I'm happy to welcome back Eva as co-host, to which she brings her knowledge and experience for this series about the 5 love languages. Whether on social media or in pop culture, it seems as if these 5 methods of giving and receiving love have become a near ubiquitous shorthand for discussing personal tastes in people and determining potential compatibility in relationships. This conversation has been broken into segments. The first segment allowed Eva to present a brief history and context for the 5 love languages, as well as some new and emerging alternatives to that framework. In the second segment, Eva began working through each of the 5 love languages and their connections to patriarchy and colonialism, and included discussion about quality time, physical affection, and words of affirmation. In this, the final part of our conversation about the 5 love languages, we finished talking about the complexities of affirmation and how it can sometimes be used to manipulate. And finally, gift giving. The episode closes with some exploration into what some of our personal love languages are, as well as how love is an infinitely adaptable language that must be learned with each new relationship. We remind you that this is a show about communication, both how we express communication and how we receive communication from others. Because, as with all parts of any relationship, communication is reciprocal. We hope you enjoy listening.
I don't know. I think we probably could say more about words of affirmation. This one's hard. It's hard for me.
Words of affirmation is hard for you?
I mean, yeah, I think I've actually gotten much better. I think we identified for a little while that that is something that you were looking for, is that you were looking for like almost like encouragement.
And it's interesting because, yes, it's true. And I think it's also an important thing to point out that needs change, because I very much don't need words of affirmation in the same way as I did at that. We were at that particular point in our relationship going through a very difficult and challenging time. And I was looking for signs that, excuse me, I was looking for signs that I felt like I was growing. I felt like I was making progress. I felt like I was both making and meeting agreements that, things were getting better.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that at that particular time, yes, I was looking for very specific. I see you doing this thing, and I see you doing that thing, and I see it, and yes, progress is happening. And also, you were, it was obvious that it was both taxing on you, because it was additional labor, emotional labor that you were expected to do. Also because it was, again, affirmations of things that should just be common practice and common, as far as relationships go. But yeah, I think that I think thankfully that those insecurities that I was experiencing at those times we together have sort of eased them, so that the affirmations are I think we both seek affirmation in different ways.
Yeah. I mean, I think we're often very proud of each other, and we let each other know, the things that we're proud of each other about, and I think that always means a lot. I also think that there was an aspect of, and I think Paco grew to understand this better, that there's an aspect of human behavior to say the thing that you think people want to hear. Again, as a sort of fawning behavior, as a sort of appeasing behavior. And for me, that aspect of what is often considered words of affirmation, like to try to reassure the person even when you don't necessarily mean exactly what you're saying, to me feels dishonest. and I was unwilling. Like I was unwilling to be dishonest about, like, even if it meant that it was like gentle encouragement, like to say I'm seeing so much progress if I wasn't seeing so much progress, or to it was sort of like, it's a trap often too,
right,
that men set, where when they want that, where they'll say, but I'm doing so much better than I was, right? And like and the whole thing is that if you say, well, not really, or like, oh yeah, like, so you're kind of stuck. It's like you're gonna say, either you're gonna affirm what they've said or you're gonna not, right? And that's kind of the choice, the binary choice you're being given,
right. And
in that
so
moment.
I think a more mature way of actually giving affirmation is recognition of challenge. And so it's like, if I say I'm struggling,
Yes.
and you're like, yeah, I see this is hard for you. Like,
Yes.
that's
Exactly. That is
that's
perfect.
that's just as affirming. Like,
Yes.
it's like, bro, you done fucked up, but I see it's hard.
Yeah, exactly.
like I see.
I would rather do that.
Yeah,
100 times over.
And there was a time when that for me felt like, wow, I'm down, and now you're kicking dirt in my face. But really, what it is, it's like it's a recognition of like, yeah, you're in the muck, man. It sucks, but you're doing it.
Yeah, and I'm not gonna lie to you.
Yeah.
I am not
Yeah.
that person. I think that honesty, because of everything that I've been through, and that I think, if we're talking about love languages, right? Recognition of each other's hurts. Like, where are the hurts for our, like, inner me's, our little people, the people we carry that kind of come out to play in these moments of hurt,
Right.
And how do we nurture those little paquitos, little evitas that live within us, like ourselves, but then also for each other? Like, how do we find joy? How do we, even through hardship, understanding each other's trauma, understanding each other's, like, just emotional journeys? That's love, right?
Yeah.
That's what that looks like. Not doing your best not to abandon people in what is an extremely disposable society. Like, I can't bring that home enough. Like I hear people kind of talk about relationships like that all the time. How relationships are temporary, and I'm like, they don't have to be.
No.
They absolutely don't have to be. Like, when you've invested so much time and energy, like, now I'm not saying stay in a fucked up abusive relationship. Never, ever, ever would I recommend that. Especially if people are unwilling to change, right? You set the boundaries that feel, again, safety is like one of my number one love languages. So if somebody refuses to create safety in relationship, then your answer's right there. You can't go further if safety isn't there. Right? But if people are making small steps towards, if you're able, and this is one of the ways, right? If you're able to set the boundaries that make you feel safe with an individual, and they are able to respect the boundaries, then that's a good sign. If they're still continuously pushing at your boundaries, then sometimes you're going to have to go one step further in creating that boundary. And I've certainly had to do that throughout different times of my lifetime. There are boundaries that I have with people from my past that are still very much in place, because these people never changed, right? They felt like they were in a place where they were fine. They're pre-contemplative is what we would call them in the motivational interviewing world of in theory of change, right? If you look at, they use this a lot in, like, smoking cessation and drug and substance abuse or a drug dependency world. Like, the idea of, like, where are you in this stage of change? And so it's like, if you don't think you have a problem at all, you're not the problem. Everybody else is. You're a victim. Victim, like creating a constant victim of yourself. Like, you're just walking through the world and everything just happens to you. You have absolutely no agency. A lot of people are stuck in that level, right? they're not going to understand what a love language like actually looks like. It's either their love language or none.
Mm-hmm.
It's either everything that serves them or it's nothing.
Right.
You
Or
know,
it's harming.
Yeah. And so with folks like that, you know, even like that basic sort of like words of affirmation, right? Like it's never going to feel, and you'll know this because you'll never feel like you're doing enough.
Mm-hmm.
You should never be working harder than the person that you're with.
Mm. Yeah, there has to be a balance.
There has to be a balance. Yes. It has to feel like you're getting as much out of it as they are. And I remember actually going back to, you know, I did have like that very romantic, I think we all did, right? We all grew up with romanticized versions of what like love would look like. That were like force fed to us by not just like our families or our experience, our cultures, our experiences of like religion, whatever those were, but also so media, right? So popularly like TV, movies, etc.
Sure.
Absolutely, I still have my very like favorite like romantic flicks that are all about that. Some of them are very problematic, others are not. Like we've talked about some in the past.
So is there a place for love languages? Like the love languages?
Well, that's what I'm trying to say. I think that there is. I just think that language, unfortunately, sometimes becomes more about precision. How no matter what you say, it's always going to be wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So language is about precision, and so it's like these are the parts of language that you can't remove from what the language context that you're in is. Right? And language is shaped by culture. That's why we get languages that are sometimes like mixtures, or we get languages that, you know, if you were at one point conquered by a people, or you know, like we talk about how there's a lot of Arabic in
Spanish. In
Castilian Spanish,
mm-hmm.
because of the Moorish invasion. We talk about how Cuban Spanish is a blend of a ton of Taino words, because it is, because we took in and we mixed, and then we had, you know, and then we had enslaved folks on the island as well, who added other cultural and linguistic aspects to the language.
Sure.
And so we get words like guagua, right? Like where you're like, what is that? Like, you know, and it's,
or imagine, like, or even how we name things. Like imagine being an indigenous person living in like Columbus, Ohio. Like the city that you live in is named after like the colonizer in chief. You know, it's there's the language. It has an impact.
Yeah, and so I mean, if language is about power over, and it often is, which is why we use language to write law.
Mm-hmm.
And then when we superimpose our laws and we say, well, you didn't have any, right? Do you have a piece of paper? Do you have some kind of like legal like system in place? And we're like, yeah, the people. Mm-hmm. It's like, that doesn't count.
Right.
Right. This is how you do it. We're going to rewrite. And so Sarah Deer's work, which I mentioned a little while ago, is about that, is about how the language of violence got written into law. Mm-hmm. You know, and so then you have, along with that, McGuire's book about in the law written around slavery, also on the books in the South, and how that functions to then create these systems of where we don't really have safety and autonomy. So how do we even talk freely with each other, even around love, right? Like if at any moment, like the person who I love can be ripped away from me, and we can have a child in common, and my child now is property that can be sold off. Like that changes the context in which I am able to love and how I am able to love. So, and language becomes more charged. And so the words that people say no longer matter as much to me, because words can change at any moment to suit your needs and not mine. Right. And that's dangerous. And so the whole language as a tool of white supremacy is sort of interwoven into religiosity, and that's where I think things like five languages get really messy, because it's not the language of love that sustains.
Yeah. It's almost, it's coercive.
Yeah, it's coercive, and it's almost like emotionally manipulative too. Say to me the thing that I want you to say to me, not the truth. And then, so we have the last one is gifts.
Oh,
yeah, I saved it for last. Did. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I will say that this one was, I think, also a difficult one for me. I think growing up, because gifts, like anything else, right? It requires for you to have the means to provide gifts, especially if you're kind of coming at it from the lens of like, a gift is something that you purchased for me, right? A gift is something that you bought, which then kind of calls into action or into play the concepts of affordability, disposability. But I also found that, like, growing up, when there was the inability to work through conflict or differences, would often get swept under the rug with like gifts. And this was, my grandfather was particularly bad about this. And I will say my grandfather was actually a very loving man. So he found other ways. Like, he was actually very affectionate and showed, he had other ways that he showed love. But one of the ways that he would show love after conflict was often to purchase something or take you out to lunch or something like that. And I learned from other parts of my family that when people did that, they were often trying to like smooth over something that had happened that was bad.
Yeah.
And keep you quiet.
Pave it over.
Yeah, pave it over. And so for me, I had a very strong reaction to people trying to like what I kind of consider buy me, like buy me off.
But mostly it's yes, buying you off and buying your silence, buying
my silence, buying my complicity, buying my forgiveness, right? Because if, and we've talked about accountability before, so this is not one that I'm going to retread, but that's kind of what it's avoiding. It's avoiding accountability. And so, for me, it's not that I don't like gifts. I just see more value in certain kind of gifts over others. And I think things like the gift of your stories, the gift of your time, the gift, and your time can show up in different ways. So for example, I love handmade gifts, because handmade gifts show me that you not only thought about something that you wanted to make for me, like you had to plan, some planning went into this, and also that you stored an idea in your brain, right? Like for later use, to like, oh, she really likes this, so I'm going to hold on to that and I'm going to try to create something out of that. And then you poured time and thought into the thing that you were going to make, and then you poured time into the thing that you actually make by actually making it. Like, all of that for me is like just so meaningful. Yeah, it's like people's gift of time, people's gift of talent, people's gift of thoughtfulness. Like that means a lot to me. But like you go in a store and just like picking up some random thing for me and like contributing to the, something that I'm gonna like, that's gonna end up in a waste field somewhere, that doesn't make me feel like cared for.
No teddy bears.
No teddy bears. No, like there was a time for that, right? When you're younger and you're still in that phase of like needing a surrogate stuffed animal to sit in for the physical love that you're missing from your parents who are working all the time.
Right.
Again, like this is again capitalism, right? Like it creates these systems of like lack for each other. And so as soon as we can start teaching our youth like how to have these conversations about needs, and like even with our kiddo who's like our kiddo is like super high our younger one, super high energy, super needs like physical touch, but not just like physical touch, like to be pushed around, to be swung, to be tickled, to be like highly stimulated, and it's tiring, and so we have to build it into these like routines of like, okay, I set a timer for 2 minutes, and that's your tickle time, because during that you're gonna be kicking at me, you're gonna be accidentally slapping me, and it's not a super fun experience for me on the other end of things. However, I can honor that it is something that your body needs, that I can easily do for you, that helps you wind down, that helps you feel cared for and loved, and helps you regulate, right? So the whole point of like teaching kids how to co-regulate is also, once I teach you how to co-regulate, you can also self-regulate eventually, right? And it's because you had it through other people, and then self-regulation also leads to a better concept of both your own ability to care for your body, and also a better ability to be able to advocate for what you need from other people in the future, right? Like, oh, my parents used to do this for me, so therefore it's not a weird thing. Like, I can ask for it from other people. And so you're able to self-advocate. And so that's kind of what we want. We want kids and community who feels not entitled to, but empowered to ask for what they need, and to then navigate that. Some people are going to be like, nah, I don't feel good. That's not something I can provide.
Right.
That's not something that I feel super good about. I can maybe do this other thing, and then you get to decide, like, is that enough? And if it's not, then maybe that's not a good fit for you. And that's okay. It's okay for people to not be the right fit partner for you, and for you to all, if you need to go your own ways, then go your own ways, and maybe even still have some kind of relationship out of that, right? Not all relationships have to include those things that you need. Maybe you can get some of those things from some relationships and not others.
Right. The relationship, they evolve, they change, they serve different functions, they have different shapes and sizes and different roles.
Exactly.
Yep.
Exactly. And so I think that was actually one of the very last things that I found, that I was like, do I even try to like fit this in? And I wanted to kind of figure out, like, it has to do with a Finnish study, so from Finland, that was looking at mapping love types through the body, and they did this through imaging. And so it's a very recent study. Like, they just kind of released the stuff about it in 2023. It identified 27 types of love in the body. And the imaging basically shows the strength of the felt sensations in the actual body, and where they were felt, and with what intensity.
Okay.
And I thought that was fascinating. I was just kind of trying to think through that, and like what it means, and like what it means about like maybe also how we're socialized to experience love. And so all types of love were felt in the head. But interpersonal love, like love that included other people, were not surprisingly felt more strongly throughout the body and in different parts of the body, depending on the type of love. So this could be like in a romantic, sexual love, or it could be like family love, or it could be different, so different kinds of love. And even things like love of nature, or like of the outdoors, or stuff like that. Like it was pretty ample, like the types of love that were presented. I just thought that like the kind of striking point for me was like that no matter what interpersonal love, which again kind of zeroes in on the idea of some of the early attachment studies, right, with Bowlby and the terry cloth mother If you remember, do you remember those studies?
I do.
Yeah.
Yeah. The stuffed monkey
with the nursing mom,
Mhm.
and like when they created a surrogate mother that had sort of soft cloth
Yeah.
around it as a feeding mechanism, and what happened with the rhesus, I think they were called like rhesus monkeys.
The rhesus monkeys.
And so the interpersonal love is always going to be the strongest because there's, and I think, and I if I were to guess why, it is because of that physical touch aspect, of actually being in a relationship with somebody. And so it just goes to show like we need each other. Like we need love. It's not just a matter of like something that you want.
Yeah.
Like you can say, I'm fine, I'm good by myself. That's not true. You are better off with other people. Isolation creates issues for the human mind. And I think there's some great depictions of that in media. Like I'm thinking about like Castaway,
with Wilson.
With Wilson, like you get a little stir crazy, you get a little bit mentally unstable, and you start to create fictional scenarios in which there are other individuals, whether you create a fake, like, I always thought of Wilson almost like a pet almost, right? So when we lack human companionship, often the next best thing available to us is a pet. And so sometimes we'll adopt a dog or a cat or something, and I think that's okay. Sometimes that's what we have, that's what we go to, but however, we still also need humans.
Yeah, because the complexity and the depth of connection.
Right. And because they give us feedback.
Right.
That we really need in order to improve.
And to give to give the experiences a meaning or a purpose.
Right. Right. Like pets are very healing and they can help us co-regulate. But at that point, the pets are almost like they're creating they're like a tool. They're a tool for our own co-regulation, especially if we're having trouble regulating ourselves. And they can do, pets can be trained. So they can be service animals. They can perform services for us that are really, really needed. And that's all good, right? Because it's a way of us like ensuring that we're in a healthy point, we're at a healthy spot to then also be able to have other relationships and get other needs met in other ways.
But they don't.
But they shouldn't substitute.
There isn't true communication.
There isn't true communication. That's correct. Yeah. Yeah. A pet, an animal, can't consent in quite the same way to the relationship that you have. Even when our dog is very communicative with us, communicates things like, okay, it's time for my walk.
Right.
You haven't walked me today. I gotta go.
Sure. But a lot of the emotional stuff that we assume is there is projected.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and we can tell because we are mammals. We can tell things like nervousness. We can tell when our dog's in pain. We can tell when our dog is nervous. We can, and that's part of why they're powerful co-regulators because they are mammals. And so they have similar systems to us in terms of our automatic, fear-based driven systems.
Yeah.
But we have the ability to communicate in complex ways that at least we think they don't. Sure. We don't know for sure, but yes, as far as we are concerned, we don't know.
Yeah. And
so that's kind of what sets us aside and what we have to be willing to work on, to expand. Yeah. And then I don't know, we could talk about the different kind of love languages that we have kind of identified for ourselves that maybe aren't a part of these common.
I think that would be fun.
Yeah. One of the exercises that I really love that I did for myself at the beginning of last year, as a sort of New Year's practice, was I created a self-love map. As well, and I think that you can do that, and you can do like something like a receptive love map right? So the idea of a self-love map are just naming ways that you show your self-love.
Okay.
Things that like immediately, no matter where they're coming from, that feel like love for you. And then the other one is the idea of like, what kinds of loves am I open to, receptive to from other people?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I think that you can use this as an exercise for yourself, and do it with different people. Don't just try it, like, don't just do it with like your partner. Like, okay, what kinds of loves am I open and available for from my partner? But also like, what kinds of love and affection am I open to from my best friend, from my neighbor, from my coworker, right? And sometimes like we have to remember too that friendships, like the amount of attention that we give our relationships actually helps them grow. So you might find that even though you only felt like this was what the possibility of this relationship was, you leave a job and you stay in touch with the person who you were coworkers with, and now you have a friendship,
Mm-hmm.
right? So relationships change over time too.
And depending on how you nurture them.
Right. And so the types of love and affection that you're open to from these people may also change over time. And so, and then the other thing that's important is that you need to repeat these exercises because of that, right? So it's like, oh, okay, the love map that I created for myself back in, I don't know, 2005 when we first got married, right? Like, that's probably really outdated. Like at this point, you know what I'm saying? Like, and so you don't think about this ones.
The same things don't stay consistent over time.
No, they don't. I mean, some things do, but not all things, right? And so, yeah, definitely repeat this as major life changes happen, and that means like, oh, you moved in together. Oh, you had the birth of a child. Oh, now you're caretaking for an elder in your family, or a sibling, or you're aging, and or you have a new illness diagnosis, right? So like all these things can shift how we give and receive love. And this is perhaps one of the most challenging things about the various categorical love languages, is that they don't really account for a lot of how like this is an ongoing, changing,
fluid organic
situation. Yeah. And they're also confining, right? They're limiting. They don't account for what is changing, or even the things that we're capable of growing into and in a single lifetime. And so I know that one of the things I asked you ahead of time that you said is that you wanted to mention too how at the beginning of a relationship, how it's important to have a sensitivity. This is how you framed it: sensitivity to your patterns in relationships.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you wanted to speak to around that?
Well, what I was thinking is that if like, it's important, like, that that you tend to be a person who rushes in really quickly, and then that energy just sort of falls off, like that you need to be able to both ease into it and sustain the energy, or that knowing that if you have certain patterns that could be that are potentially harmful for the relationship, or that are really good at establishing the relationship, just that you're aware of them, and that you also communicate those things to that partner or to that person, whatever the relationship might be. So that way you can recognize them both in yourself, and then you can be sensitive to those red flags in other people too. Or if they're, I don't know what the opposite of a red flag is. As
a green flag.
A green flag?
Yeah.
Is that what we call it?
Yeah.
In a relationship, like, oh, you've got that. I like that green flag.
Green flag. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. That you can be sensitive to those things as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. And I know that like there's a stereotype, for example, in like queer communities sometimes, that like moving fast is not as much of a red flag, and this gets kind of like, this is like the stereotypical like U-hauling,
Right.
like lesbians type like thing.
Mhm.
And I'll say that even like I'm the kind of person that it doesn't matter what the gender of the relationship is. I generally, if somebody's trying to move too quickly,
Mm-hmm.
that's generally going to be some kind of a red flag for me.
Right. And I think also something that I've learned to be mindful of, thanks to you, is consistency. Like people who present one way
Yeah.
here, and then the behaviors change over time, or
Or in different
or in different settings,
yeah.
or
Yeah.
if there's like almost like a costume shifting, or there's a like a chameleon effect.
Yeah.
Those are
That isn't maybe accounted for by like code shifting, because
correct
we're clearly aware of, like, we code shift.
in different situations with
Yeah.
different types of people. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But if you have a person who at the beginning of the relationship is very, very thoughtful and very kind and takes the time and shows their affection and goes out of their way to make you feel special and
Yeah.
all of those things. But then, like, once the deed is done, or
Right.
once everything is settled, and then once everything is nice and safe and comfortable, boom, it's like a cliff. It all drops off.
Because there are books for that too. I'm serious.
Yeah.
There are books like teaching people how to like get women to sleep with them,
Right.
and like if I just say all the right things,
Yeah.
get her, like, and it's sad, but it's true. Like,
sure.
it's, and I've had people as of late tell me, yeah, I was up on a bunch of dating apps and I have now gotten rid of all my dating apps. I've heard horror stories about people in marriages who are on these dating apps basically having a bunch of affairs, but they present as like single men.
Mm.
And so much so that there are underground groups that are formed just to post the picture of the person that you're about to go on a date with,
Mm-hmm.
just to see if anybody else in community is dating the same person.
Mm-hmm.
There, and I've been told about those. I've been told about the women who found out that the person is married and have like had to have conversations with the wife. I've the stories abound. Like, it's dating apps, like, also just people literally swiping like that they like you, only to be able to send you negative messages, tell you how ugly and put you down as a freaking pastime.
Yeah.
Like, I just the crew. And so this is the problem, right? It's like a lot of these are like great for, we're also disconnected, so this is creating a little bit of accessibility to people.
Yeah.
But the anonymity of it, and not actually knowing who the person is, and seeing the harm that you do when you say something to somebody, something that's really ugly about how ugly they are, or how they're really unattractive, or sending them an unsolicited, dick pic, which is like the other really big thing is, and kind of like the horror and the like, hey, we weren't there,
Mm-hmm.
That kind of is kind of lost in that digital world a little bit, right? Like, it's something that you wouldn't, if it's something that you wouldn't do in real life, but feel kind of entitled to do in a digital space, that you should be questioning that, right? If it's something that you still would do in real life, then probably the repercussions to you socially are going to be greater, right? Like, now we're looking at lewd and lascivious, like, behavior that is prosecutable. So if you're doing things online that you wouldn't do in real life, you should be asking questions about what makes you feel entitled to do that. If it's because you have an unexpressed kink and you're having some issues around repression, that's okay. But let's have that conversation.
Have that conversation for sure.
Yeah, let's have that conversation about how you like to get it on. Like, you like to send, like, you're into showing your body. That's okay. There are communities out there for that.
There are.
There are.
Unfortunately, a lot of that, though, is about the power of being anonymous and the thrill of the risk and the surprise then of
Right.
of taking advantage of these people who are making themselves vulnerable. Like,
Right.
the power that they're granted, and they abuse that power.
Right. But I mean, one of the neat things about the brain, right, is that the brain, this is why pornography is such an issue in society. It's not let's talk about like people not being paid well and people being taken advantage of. Like that's the early porn industry. The porn industry has changed some, so I want to acknowledge that. However, part of the reason that it creates issues with addiction for some people is that the brain can't tell the difference between real sex and the sex that you experience in pornography because the same pleasure centers are sort of turned on during the watching of. And so, and also then it kind of teaches you unrealistic expectations of what like sex actually works like, right? However, there's sex now that is being portrayed that is more akin to what really happens, right? So it includes things like, oh, I'm clumsy while I'm trying to put on prophylaxis, like I'm like, oh, whoops, I can't find the hole, whatever, right? Whatever it is, like that's not the early pornography that people were watching when they lacked sex education.
Yeah.
Where they were learning things about sex and love from was unrealistic. It was unrealistic and it painted a portrait of like women sort of being these subjects that were okay with whatever. Oh, wow, you surprised me. Whoa, and all of a sudden I'm like ready to go.
Right.
Right? Like that's not how it works, right? So yeah, I mean, you're going to get, if you get your power from that, like you might meet somebody who maybe is okay with coming to an agreement with you that you're just going to like, from time to time surprise them by like flashing them or something like that. You might meet a community where, where that's acceptable. And that can be a way that gets expressed, and then the rest of it is like you working through your own stuff. There's stuff that we all have to work through. So I think we talked about safety as a love language. We haven't talked about food as a love language, but I would count food
absolutely
as one.
I spend a lot of time in the kitchen preparing food because for me, like it's a way that I show love for myself because it's a way of grounding and remaining present, but it's also providing nourishment and time and love with quality food. Like even our older kid just yesterday was like, our food is just so much better, and it's because it's not because I'm like, I mean, I'm a good. We're good cooks, but like it's not just that. It's because we're thoughtful with how we plan the meals. We're thoughtful with the ingredients that we use. We're thoughtful with how it's presented. We're thoughtful with how we consume it together.
Yeah.
Like it's not just the food. It's a process, and it's a way of creating community.
Yeah. And I try to grow stuff that we can eat.
Right.
Yeah.
And so food very much, I think, is an often unexplored means of showing love and building community beyond just the consumeristic, like let's go out and have dinner together. Like there's so much that goes into food preparation that allows for opportunities for demonstrating love and care. All of those things that I just listed, from the planning to the preparing to the eating.
Yeah. And I mean there are,
and then the cleanup.
Yeah, and there are cultural, like for me there are cultural meals that make me feel like home. There are meals that I associate with very specific times in my life, and I know that you sometimes talk about music that way, so I wonder about music as a love language too. But you talk about how at times you hear a song and it immediately transports you back to the first time you heard it, and for me it's sort of like more like feelings, and so meals that transport me back to feelings that I've had.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah. And so food definitely as a love language, music probably as a love language too.
I don't know. I've never thought of it. I think in the sharing of music, I think so. Like I think that you and I like I've learned to really appreciate like Latin and specifically Caribbean
Mm-hmm.
music as a means of bonding with you. Um, so I think that in the same way that it conveys culture and it conveys a thoughtfulness of how we curate the music that we listen to,
Mm-hmm.
and then that we listen to it together. Like I think as a shared experience, it very much can be a love language. Yeah.
There's some booty shaking in the kitchen
Oh, the dancing
as
is
the food's being made.
absolutely.
So
Yeah, yeah.
that's happening. But I mean, like even before that, we were doing, we would do like karaoke nights,
Or we go to concerts.
or we go to concerts. Yeah.
And again, all of this is talking about how it all blends together. Like it's the food is an act of service and quality time and physical because we're shaking them booties.
We're shaking them booties.
So it's all of it
That's
all
right.
mixed in together. Like that's the whole point is that I think it's an oversimplification to compartmentalize love as an expression. Like it is love is a language, but it's a diverse and complex language that exceeds the limitations
Mm-hmm.
of categorization.
Right. And I think that with every single individual, you have to learn to speak a new, like it's almost like with each individual, you have to learn how to speak a new type of love language because n- it's going to be somewhat nuanced. So like you can't apply this love languages concept in quite the same way. You can have again, you can use it as a starting point.
Yeah.
Like to be like, hey, like how do you feel about this? Like even within, and I think that's part of why I kept like harping on the physical intimacy piece, because it's like even within physical intimacy, there's like they call it a survey of, right? So it's like a survey of all the types of ways that you can relate to one another physically that you may or may not be interested in,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so like if the things that are like really high on your list are really low on somebody else's, like that might signal some incompatibility long term,
Yeah.
unless it's something that's like, okay, yeah, but even though it's high on my physical love, uh part of like how I want to relate to somebody in this role in my life, it's still lower than other parts of how I want to relate to this person,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so in that case, it might work out fine, you know. Other ones that I have are adventuring, providing care, receiving care, making fun,
Mm-hmm.
like not making fun of anything, but like making fun together.
Yeah.
Which I think kind of goes with adventuring too. But I feel like you can have fun in a lot of different contexts. Whereas like for me, like adventuring is more about doing new things,
Yeah.
but making fun can be old things too. Can be things that are tried and true. I mentioned flirting earlier. Flirting is on my list. And healing. I said healing together as well, because that's something that I think gets often overlooked. As like a pretty important part of the maintenance of relationships is kind of how all of your wounds get poked at and exposed in love. And so if you haven't already dealt with it, you're going to be faced with it over and over again when you're in intimate relationships, whether those be friendships or romantic relationships or sexual relationships.
That's it for this conversation about love languages. Thanks for listening. Once again, I just want to give Eva a huge thank you for the gift of her time, experience, knowledge, humor, and love. If you have questions, comments, or ideas for future episodes, feel free to share them with us via social media, email them to finlos@finloslives.com, or you can leave a voice message via the SpeakPipe app at finloslives.com. If you enjoyed this content, we hope you'll share the podcast. We look forward to our next conversation. What was what we just saw this meme, this video a couple days ago. How can you tell when, no matter how wealthy they are now, how can you tell when a person grew up poor?
Yep.
That they can't help but stop and look at the garbage on the road.
I gotta see what's going on.
Gotta see what's going
on there.
Every single time.
What can I change? Yeah.
Eva looks at me and I'm like, I'm slowing down. I gotta look at that pile. I gotta look at that pile. Look at that. Yeah.
That's true love right there.
No. Yeah.
You go picking.
Well, any day.
Go picking with each
other.
other.
I love it. I was born dumpster diving. We found some treasures.
Yeah. There's some good stuff. I mean, I think that's part of the what do we consider love languages part, right? It's like folks like that's hot to me. Like folks who are it's freaking hot to me. Like when somebody's like trying to figure out how to like upcycle something.
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah.
Yeah, it's like we're walking down the street doing our evening walk. So, there's that dresser on the side of the road. And it's like 10 o'clock at night and Eva looks at me I'm like, you want that, don't you? And I was like, yeah.
Yeah, let's go pick that up.
Let's go pick that up. That'll be good right there.
Over there, full of cockroach, caca. It was man. Like but, that.
Hey, it's looking good though.
It's looking good. I'm yeah.